we better crack on, because Angela Rayner is facing new questions over her £800,000 flat at the centre of a sleaze row.
Well, it's now being reported that the Deputy Prime Minister used £160,000 from a trust fund set up for her disabled son to buy that Hove property earlier this year.
Well, the fund, awarded after a lengthy NHS legal battle over his premature birth, also purchased a share of her former home in Greater Manchester.
Well, Angela Rayner has already admitted she underpaid stamp duty on the new flat and says she deeply regrets the legal error.
It's been quite a distressing time for my family. I have a court order that was in place around confidentiality regarding my son, my family and my divorce proceedings that happened in 2023, and therefore wasn't able to give a full account of the circumstances of our complex living arrangements. That order was lifted last night. I applied to have that order lifted so that I could give people the information.
Let's talk to former political adviser Charlie Rowley. Morning to you, Charlie.
Good morning.
What is this, a monumental cock-up or some deliberate act to save money, do you think?
I think it is a gross act of incompetence on behalf of the Deputy Prime Minister, who is the Housing Secretary, and it could be a cover-up. All now hinges on what advice she received, and that advice would have been given on the basis of the information that she submitted to the tax advisors. So if she failed to declare something that would have been advised to her, that if you have a trust, then the advisors would have responded by saying, well, then, of course, you've got to then include that as part of the purchase of your new property in Hove, so you would have to pay the full stamp duty. If she failed to declare that trust, then the tax advisors would come back to say, you don't need to pay it. So the onus is on Angela Rayner to what has she disclosed to the advisors before receiving their advice? If she admitted to talk about the trust, that is incompetence. If she deliberately failed to do so, knowing that actually the response would be that you don't have to pay the council tax, then that's evasion and tax dodging. Either way, it doesn't look good for a Deputy Prime Minister who is the Housing Secretary that would have all the advisors at her disposal, all the levers to ask all of these questions, on the back of having her fingers burnt when they first came into office, when she first became Housing Secretary, about council tax in her Ashton-under-Lyne home in the north. You would have thought you'd want to be squeaky clean whenever you're buying a new property or doing anything in relation to housing. This is the second time Angela Rayner has made front-page news on the back of a housing issue. So something isn't well. And therefore, I think when you're reading stories in the papers over the summer about the Treasury coming for property taxes, when you're seeing many, many other people from vulnerable groups that are having to pay more in tax, the idea that it is now one rule for Angela Rayner to be able to avoid £40,000 in stamp duty and one rule for everybody else, I think has set in train. The public won't allow it to continue, and I think that's she'd be better off taking the ownership of the story and resigning.
And it's interesting what you say about wanting to be squeaky clean, and you'd think that would be top of her agenda, considering that she's been, well, the attack dog, really, for the Labour Party for years, hasn't she, when it comes to the Tory party, when it comes to ethics and standards. I mean, she's called the Tory scum, hasn't she, before, when it comes to their own sleaze scandals. So this is the problem, isn't it? I mean, Nadeem Zahawi has been talking about this, saying that he's hurt by the hypocrisy of all of this. She called for him to go.
I think that's right. And look, throughout this story has run for over a week now, and day after day we've seen Labour ministers, Labour politicians try and go out to defend her, to say she's done absolutely nothing wrong. Well, obviously, she's, by her own admission, she has done something wrong. They've gone out to say this is misogynistic, that this is a class warfare. It is absolutely none of those things, now that we've got the admission of guilt that she has made a mistake. On what level, that remains to be seen. That's why there's a report coming up by Sir Laurie Magnus, the PM's ethics advisor, to advise just who knew what when and what went wrong, and the level of punishment that should be advised to the Prime Minister.
If she's been given the wrong advice, and regardless of I don't know how the trust issue plays into it. I mean, it all gets very complicated, doesn't it? But if she has gone to a lawyer, which she says she had, a property lawyer, and said, what do I owe on this? And they've said, well, you don't owe the 70,000, you owe 30,000, and she's paid it. Is she to blame?
Well, the question will be, what did she submit to the tax authority or the advisors in the first place? It is inconceivable, from all the conversations that I heard yesterday from property experts and tax lawyers, that if she had declared to them that she had a trust, that they would not have come back to say, well, therefore you don't need to pay the stamp duty on the property that you're purchasing.
Because she sold what she owned in that property in Manchester, she sold to the trust to get then that money out of the trust to pay the deposit on this one.
And regardless of the circumstances of the trust and how that has come about, and obviously, you know, she gave a very emotional interview yesterday and trying to explain to the public a bit more about her personal circumstances, and that's why it might be a bit more complicated than what people might have thought. But regardless of those circumstances, the facts are she has a trust. She's part ownership of that trust, and that is the problem. And so did she declare that to the tax advisors before receiving the advice, or did she not? If she did, it would be interesting to know who she actually sought advice from, because I can't imagine this tax firm or this legal firm are very happy now that the Deputy Prime Minister has basically blamed them. I think they'd be more than happy now to show what advice they gave to the Deputy Prime Minister. So she's isolating herself at every juncture here. If there was a specific tax lawyer or tax advisor that said to her, knowing full well that she owned this trust, and yet she didn't need to disclose, she didn't need to pay the full stamp duty, then obviously people will question that particular tax route. But I think that would be slightly inconceivable, given all the comments that I heard yesterday from people that work in tax and property.
What do you make of accusations that the Prime Minister has misled the public when he was saying that Angela Rayner was a victim of misogyny and briefing against her, when it's understood that Number 10 knew at that time that Angela Rayner was seeking independent advice on this situation, legal advice on this situation, and that potentially she'd not paid enough tax?
Well, again, I mean, I'm not entirely sure who's advising the Prime Minister. You know, just as, you know, last year he was able to go and tell the whole country that if you care about your community and if you've got a problem, maybe about a migrant hotel, you're part of a far-right bandwagon. That was the Prime Minister's words from Number 10. If he's now siding with Angela Rayner and trying to call other people that are holding her to account, that are scrutinising, you know, they're not in opposition anymore. You know, they're not a campaign organisation. This is the government. You know, they're sworn into office. They take up their seals of office and have to be held to the highest and moral standards in public life. And if you've got the Deputy Prime Minister, who has done fantastically well in terms of social mobility, that has come from humble beginnings, and who that is why people like her, but that doesn't exonerate you from having to play by the rules like everybody else. And if you've gone out of your way, and you might not have, or if you've made so you've either gone out of your way to avoid paying stamp duty, or you've deliberately withheld your own affairs in order to get a particular amount of advice, or if you've just been totally blasé about it, bearing in mind you are the Housing Secretary, regardless of your personal circumstances, I would argue, as I think the public do, as in a lot of the front pages do today, you are not fit for public office. You shouldn't be in that role. And I think what she's now doing is taking so much bandwidth away from the government. They're trying to have a second phase, this relaunch that the Prime Minister talked about on Monday, she's probably done Keir Starmer a favour, because he said, you know, he had full confidence in her on the Monday. Well, it only took 2 days later before he said, oh, she's admitted a mistake. You know, there is clearly a breakdown in communication about what's happened in Number 10 and her affairs. This is now, you know, when you've got the coalition of the willing that you were talking about, when Rachel Reeves gave an interview yesterday in the run-up to the budget, all of that is lost. All because of Angela Rayner and her tax affairs, because she's allowed people to go out and defend her when it is clearly indefensible. Now she's had to reverse ferret because she's admitted a mistake. It doesn't look good. It is taking too much attention away from the government. She is becoming a headache for the Prime Minister, and she would be better off owning the situation, acknowledging the mistake, resigning, and allowing the government to move on with its programme.